video brings us to the crazy, intense, busy, yet incredibly culturally diverse and spiritual country of India. India has its fair share of beautiful landmarks, both natural like the Himalayas in the far north and man-made like the world-famous Taj Mahal. Its incredibly diverse and rich culture, with 121 documented languages spoken, not including dialects, which is estimated at around 19,500, making it one of the most, if not the most, multilingual country in the world, known to be home to at least 700 different subcultures, and not to mention its incredible cuisine, which saw countless countries over the years going to war over controlling the Indian spice trade. But India also has its fair share of issues, both geographically, from its congested, chaotic streets to its dense, life threatening smog, and its extreme heat in summer and monsoon floods. But perhaps none of these issues matter as much as their plethora of social and humanitarian issues. It's no secret India struggles a lot with poverty and a lack of programs to help those who are living in abject poverty. With 60% of India's nearly 1.3 billion population trying to survive on less than $3.10 per day. That's not to say there haven't been improvements on this number, with the poverty rate noticeably decreasing between 2011 to 2019 by around 10%. Another issue affecting abject poverty in India is that the caste system is still very much alive, and many people view poverty as a curse or karma, and that people are in that position for a reason. So it isn't seen with much sympathy, or that it should be a societal action to do something about it. Another issue that will be very prevalent in today's case is India's attitude towards women. Only about 25% of Indians openly acknowledge discrimination against women, and particularly involving sexual harassment and the workplace, as an issue. However, three-quarters of Indian adults do cite violence against women as a huge problem in Indian society. Which brings us to the subject of today's case. Today, we're going to discuss the unbelievable, horrific events in the case of who's known as Dr. Abhaya, a female young junior doctor working in the megacity of Kolkata, India. Kolkata, including its suburbs, has a population of around 14.3 million, making it the third most populous in India. Despite the horrifics of today's case, Kolkata was actually recently polled as the safest city in India. Today's case focuses on a young female doctor who lived and worked in Kolkata. She was 31 at the time of this case. The case focuses on the stark contrast here of a young woman caring for others, but no system in place to care for her while she was working and caring for others. Indian law forbids anyone from revealing the name of a rape victim. So the media or other people often choose the name for them. For the sake of this story, let's refer to her as Dr. Abhaya, the name given to her by other female doctors for her bravery. Abhaya was a 31-year-old medical student in Kolkata who was doing her placement as part of her medical degree. Abhaya was an only child and came from a middle class family, growing up in a small home on the outskirts of Kolkata. She defied all odds to rise up in India's notorious caste system and become a doctor. She was dedicated to her family, and her father would remark she would often put everything on hold to look after his health and constantly told them not to worry about her. She worked long hours as part of her training in hopes of achieving a gold medal within her degree. She was also planning her wedding for November 2024. Her family described that she was dedicated to her ambitions and cared deeply for those she treated. It was common for Abhaya to work long shifts, 12 hours plus, as is common for healthcare workers in India. On the night of this tragic case, it was August the 8th, 2024, and Abhaya was working at Kolkata's RGKR Medical College, an insane 36-hour shift. Late in the evening of the 8th of August, she had dinner with her fellow junior doctors and then decided to go take a nap at around 2 a.m. It isn't uncommon for doctors to do this, considering shifts can run up to 36 hours. Of course, doctors routinely have to sleep at work. You'd think there'd be places designated for doctors and nurses to sleep, but as I'm sure you can imagine, in India, this is not always the case. Due to the lack of designated rest spaces at the hospital, Abhaya decided to rest in the hospital's seminar hall, understandably presuming it was safe. As the hours went by, no one saw or heard from her. It wasn't until around 9:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time the same morning, now the 9th of August 2024, that a body was found in a shocking state. In the same seminar hall Abhaya had gone to rest. The body was, of course, that of Abhaya. She was presumed to have been murdered around 3 a.m. in the early hours of the 9th of August 2024, meaning Abhaya was tragically and unbelievably murdered in her own workplace in the middle of a shift. But it will get much, much worse from here, because I'm sure you're thinking, why would someone want to murder this woman? She had no troubles or disputes with anyone, and she was just a genuine young woman working towards her future and planning her wedding. Well, unfortunately, the motive was one that's not so uncommon in India, and that is that of randomly motivated violent sexual assault and murder. It became evident quickly that there was a violent sexual nature to this crime, as Abhaya was found semi naked with blood oozing from her eyes, mouth, and genitals. There were also reported signs of mutilation and broken bones. Now, this is where the facts of the crime start to get washy and contested. Considering the severity of the injuries Abhaya sustained, the case was quickly theorized as being a gang. However, many started to argue that this was not the case and there wasn't enough sufficient evidence to suggest so, or they tried to downplay the evidence that was sufficient enough to suggest so. One forensic doctor contributing to the investigation early on, who others then tried to discredit, saw the post mortem report and noted that according to the autopsy report, 150 milligrams of liquid was found from the vaginal swab. That quantity cannot be of one person. It suggests the involvement of multiple people, Dr. Goswami said. This statement would then later on go to be tarnished, and different doctors would try and say that she was talking about the volume of the uterus, the weight of the uterus, or something else, like trying to discredit that this was ever said. But Dr. Goswami was not the only doctor who stated this. Many agreed with the high likelihood of this hypothesis that there are other issues with disagreement over the facts of this case, with some reporting Abhaya had 16 plus broken bones, while others insist it was no more than 13. Either way, both are really serious numbers. So inconsistencies like this would keep popping up. Early on, people would suggest things that make this case like really horrible, with lots of involvement from different individuals. But then we'll see as the case continues, people try more and more to make it look like it was only the act of one perpetrator. The local investigators were quick to try and squash this insight. However, let's be honest, the investigative body isn't exactly known for its accuracy or transparency in handling cases. There have been lots and lots of criticism about the Kolkata police for not being transparent and covering up cases, basically, which we'll come back to later. Kolkata's R.G. Carr Medical College principal, Sandeep Ghosh, shamelessly tried to write off this murder straight away as a suicide, even trying to convince the parents that Abhaya was unstable and it was most likely she tried to commit suicide at work. On top of that, Gosh also refrained from calling the police after finding the scene for 3 hours. Straight away, her parents weren't buying it, obviously. Why would a woman so meticulously planning for her future, working her ass off to get ahead, and excitably planning her upcoming marriage, kill herself all of a sudden and at work, of all places? Come on. Sources suggested that her nose and mouth were covered and her head was forcibly pushed against a wall or a floor to silence her cries for help. As well, there were also many signs of violence and broken bones that Dr. Goswami and others noted were not possible to be inflicted by just one person. Due to her father already being delayed access to see his daughter, and on top of that, being told it was a suicide, her dad straight away put the pressure on for a serious investigation, citing that he demanded a judicial magistrate. There were clear signs of rape, and the suicide excuse was a clear cover up for her father, which only enhanced her father's grave concerns as it was clear the hospital was trying to slow down his daughter's investigation. Dr. Sandeep Ghosh, the former head of RGKAR Medical College and Hospital, where Abhay was working, was asked to go on leave after concerns were raised over his leadership and response during the case. And Dr. Ghosh also faced backlash for comments perceived as victim blaming and for failing to maintain adequate safety for staff, after which he resigned from his post. After looking into what these victim blaming comments were, I don't even know how they could say it was perceived victim blaming, because one of his comments were saying it was irresponsible of Abhaya to go and sleep in the seminar hall. I don't even have to get into how ridiculous that is, but I'm sure I will later. However, in a surprising turn of events, he was reinstated as principal of Kolkata Medical College and Hospital just 24 hours later. This just speaks to even higher corruption, in my opinion. To make it even more unbelievable, in the meantime all of this was going on, the walls of the hall near the seminar room where the crime occurred were broken down under the pretext of renovation. I'm sorry, renovations? You have to be kidding me. The audacity of the hospital administration to tamper with the evidence shows its desperation to protect some people linked with this crime, most likely senior officials, I suppose. The public outcry from this case was swift, especially considering a junior doctor was on shift and so brutally essayed and murdered in her place of work. Questions surrounding women's safety in the workplace were brought up again, as this wasn't a new question in India. Strikes were held all across the country in protest of the complete and utter lack of even the slightest accountability or actions being taken to protect female doctors at work. The outrage only intensified when the public found out about Ghosh trying to release the investigation and write it off as a suicide, and he didn't stop there. This is where we get to the comments he made. So he blatantly said it was irresponsible for Abhaya to go to the seminar hall alone at night and accused her as being psychotic. He then went on to explain that he didn't think the hospital should have to provide adequate rest facilities for staff members on 36-hour shifts. Let me just say that again, 36 hours. And you don't think you should have to provide rest facilities? Between the suspicious Dr. Gosh and the body who accepted his resignation under pressure and then reinstated him instead of dismissing him, the public were screaming corruption and cover up and case mishandling, and as such, the Indian FBI, known as the CBI, Central Bureau of Investigation, were brought in to investigate this case. And it didn't take them long to release explosive details of this case and the handling of it early on, which only fueled the assumption by the public that this case was a
उत्साह
major
से
cover up.
बर्दाश्त नहीं की जाएंगी। सबकी
This
हैसियत है
case
कि इस बात
drew
को रद्द
stark
करें।
similarities to the
15 December
2012
2012,
Delhi gang
a
rape case,
girl was
where a
brutally
young
gang
woman was
raped and fatally
brutally
assaulted in a
essayed
city bus.
and
And
murdered
that
on a
incident has then
private bus.
showcased across the
This
nation.
case was also filled
Just
with
December
alleged
2010,
suicides
has
when one
anything
of the
changed?
perpetrators died in
No, it's a
prison,
big no.
again,
There's no
apparently
change.
from
दस साल
suicide.
हो गए अभी भी
However,
पूरा
in this
I
instance,
don't think there's
4 of the
anything.
arrested were executed for their horrendous crime. Protests sprung up across the nation demanding safety for women, but of course, there were still people blaming her for being on the bus at night. Her name, Jyoti Singh, came out over time. She was just 22 when this happened. Unfortunately, just 1 year later, another 22-year-old woman was gang essayed, this time on work assignment as a journalist in Mumbai. She was, however, luckily spared her life, but the 5 men were charged and all the ones over 18 were also executed. The CBI were brought in due to the chronic mishandling and suspicions aroused early on. However, public opinion of the CBI hopefully doing a better job was also very low. The CBI also seemingly followed a very basic conclusion, ignoring all the suspicious acts and all the comments from doctors who studied the postmortem results. They seem to follow an easy story of the crime being orchestrated by one man alone, a man who was working in the hospital that day, which of course was super disappointing to the family and also super disappointing to all the public that were invested in this case. They were seemingly ignoring all the early agreed upon postmortems showing too much semen for one man, showing multiple broken bones and fractures that weren't coherent with one man, but none of this seemed to matter. They also seemingly ignored the sketchy renovations of the crime scene, um, the the director of the hospital like disappearing and then coming back, just so many things that didn't add up. So it came that the CBI released their version of events, much to everyone's disappointment. I suppose there was an element of relief that there was some story, but again, everyone knew that this just couldn't be the whole story. The CBI's case goes as follows. From August 5th to the 8th, a man named Sanjoy Roy traveled to Salua in Kharagpur, sorry for my pronunciation, to attend a police welfare society meeting. He stayed there from August the 5th to the 8th, claiming he was on duty as a civic assistant. On the morning of August 8, upon his return to Kolkata, in the morning of August 8, Sanjoy Roy first visited RGKAR Hospital, where he worked as a broker to facilitate the admission of a patient. After ensuring the patient was admitted, he left the hospital but returned later that night. In the night of August the 8th, at around 11 p.m., Sanjay returned to the hospital to assist the same patient with an x ray. The patient's family accompanied him during this time. After spending a few minutes with them, Sanjay left the hospital building. In the early hours of August the 9th, Sanjay returned to the hospital again at around 1 a.m. to help another patient whose surgery was scheduled. After assisting this patient, he remained on the hospital premises where he consumed alcohol with one of the patient's relatives behind the hospital building. He also provided financial assistance to the patient's family and arranged an Uber bike for their journey home. At 3 a.m. August the 9th, Sanjay went back to the third floor of the chest medicine building at the hospital. Within minutes, he entered the seminar hall where Abhaya was resting. It was here that he allegedly raped and murdered her. The investigators concluded that Sanjay approached Abhaya while she was sleeping and forced her mouth to the ground so she couldn't scream, and began violently assaulting her, breaking her bones and physically assaulting her to such an extent that it caused bleeding from her genitals, eyes, and mouth. Before murdering her via strangulation and smothering, Sanjay left the seminar hall after about 40 to 45 minutes in the room with Abhaya. At around 4:30 a.m. on August the 9th, CCTV footage captured Sanjay leaving the hospital premises at around 4:37 a.m. He then returned to his barrack and went to sleep. Sanjay Roy himself does seem to be a bit of a savory character. After he was arrested, his former mother in law, in an interview, alleged that Roy used to beat his ex wife and that a police complaint had been filed against him for the same. She said that Sanjay was not a good person, and she said, I quote, hang him or do whatever you want with him. A CBI official stated that after that was based on a psychoanalytic profiling Roy that he was a pervert and severely addicted to pornography. He stated that Roy had an animal like instinct and showed no sense of guilt about the murder. The CBI official said, I quote, the man showed no repentance and narrated the entire episode, giving every minute detail without hiccups. It appeared he had no remorse. Now, while I agree that Sanjay Roy does sound like a real piece of shit, I feel like he's also the perfect scapegoat to take the fall for probably several people in a case like this with a background like his. Now, that's not to say I don't suspect he was involved, but it's to say that I don't suspect he was the only one involved. So now let's return to the CBI's version of events. So, according to them, later that morning, August the 9th, the Kolkata police, after reviewing the CCTV footage and observing his suspicious activities, detained Sanjay Roy from the barrack. He was brought back to the hospital for questioning. In the evening of August 9, following a prolonged interrogation, the police arrested Sanjay Roy, who now faces charge of rape and murder in connections with his crime. But notably, the CBI are satisfied with the conclusion that he apparently was acting alone. Even with the outcry from her parents and others investigating the case, that this was at the very least a gang rape. Sanjay was either just one part of the crime and being used as the fall guy, or he was a complete scapegoat. The defendant said as much in his January 2025 sentencing, claiming, I am being framed and have not committed any crime. I have not done anything, and still I have been held guilty. While, of course, this is a typical plea of innocence for someone that is found guilty of such a heinous crime, I have to admit, I also think there is more to it than just this guy, and I'm not alone in that thought. Abhaya's parents also agreed, stating after the court gave Roy life imprisonment instead of the death penalty, explaining their decision with, this wasn't the rarest of cases. Her mother openly stated, we are shocked. How can this not be the rarest of cases? An on duty doctor was raped and murdered while being on duty. We are dismayed. This was a larger conspiracy behind the crime. Those were the words straight from Abhaya's mother's mouth. Even the BJP agreed, calling this a travesty of justice. The BJP's IT department head, Amit Malviya, who is also his party's organizational co in charge for West Bengal, called for appealing the judgment and for probe agencies to investigate the role of the then Kolkata commissioner and the state's chief minister, Mamata Banerjee, for allegedly destroying the evidence. He said on Twitter, life imprisonment and a 50,000 rupee fine for Sanjay Roy, accused in the RGKR rape and murder case, is a travesty of justice. The verdict must be appealed. He added, West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee must stop shielding the criminal. Agencies also need to investigate the role of the then Kolkata Commissioner and the Chief Minister in the destruction of evidence. Like I was saying before, like the renovations, not letting people in for hours, etc., etc. Justice must not only be done, but must also be seen to be done. The Kolkata court sentenced Sanjay Roy to life imprisonment till death on Monday after he was convicted of rape and murder of the on-duty doctor at the State Medical College. Perhaps the most disappointing part of the sentencing was that he didn't get the death penalty, but that the sentencing was so clearly a cover up, and this man was taking all the heat when there were clearly more people involved. But this sentencing now effectively closes the case and is being forced onto people as the accepted conclusion. More recently, it has even come out that Dr. Ghosh was involved with trafficking unclaimed bodies and medical waste, hinting that this perhaps could have been involved with trafficking. Now, I've tried my best to represent the situation as it is. I'm sure I've missed things or misinterpreted some timelines, but the Indian government hasn't exactly been transparent about the case, and there's even people saying that they can't see any media of this case from within India without using a VPN. And so I think that speaks more volume to just how high level this cover
Their
up
daughter
could
was
have
unwell
been.
and later
And I
informed she
think
had
this is
committed
a good
suicide.
time to
On
segue
August 9, the
into a
assistant
video I
superintendent
found that was
contacted
like
the
a
victim's father
leaked
3 times.
recording of
And what exactly
between Abhaya's
he said in
parents
these
and the
calls?
medical staff
Let me play the
when
first clip.
they informed the parents about what had happened. Take a listen.
হ্যাঁ
হ্যালো, তার বাড়ির লোক
কেন কে বলছে?
আরজিকর হসপিটাল থেকে বলছিলাম।
কেন কি হয়েছে?
ওর একটু শরীরটা খারাপ হয়েছে, আপনারা কি একটু আসতে পারবেন ইমিডিয়েট?
কেন কি হয়েছে কি?
ওর শরীরটা খারাপ, আমরা ভর্তি করাচ্ছি ওকে, আপনি কি ইমিডিয়েট একটু আসতে পারবেন?
কি হয়েছে কি সেটা বলবেন তো?
সেটা তো ডাক্তাররা বলবে আপনারা এলে। আমরা আমরা আপনার নাম্বারটা জোগাড় করলাম, করে জানালাম যে বাড়ির লোক হিসেবে আপনারা একটু তাড়াতাড়ি আসুন।
কি হয়েছে সেটা বলো না তুমি।
পেশেন্ট শরীরটা খারাপ, ভর্তি হয়েছে হসপিটালে, বাকিটা আপনারা এলে ডাক্তার বলবে।
ওর কি জ্বর হয়েছে?
আপনারা একটু আসুন, জলদি চলে আসুন, যত তাড়াতাড়ি পারবেন।
কেন খুব অবস্থা খারাপ
খুব
নাকি?
অবস্থা খারাপ, হ্যাঁ খুব অবস্থা খারাপ, একটু তাড়াতাড়ি চলে আসুন।
কি হয়েছে?
ড্রাইভারে ফোন করো।
হ্যালো,
হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে ঠিক আছে।
হ্যাঁ একটু তাড়াতাড়ি আসবেন। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ বলুন। হ্যালো
হ্যালো
হ্যাঁ বলুন।
বাবা বলছি।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ বলুন বলুন।
কি হয়েছে কি সেটা বলো না একটু।
ওনার অবস্থা খুবই খারাপ, ওনার অবস্থা খুবই খারাপ, আপনি যতটা তাড়াতাড়ি পারবেন চলে আসুন।
কি হয়েছে না সেটা বলো না।
ওটা তো ডাক্তার বলবে, আপনি একটু তাড়াতাড়ি চলে আসুন এখানে।
আপনি কে বলছেন বলুন তো?
আমি অ্যাসিস্ট্যান্ট সুপার বলছি, আমি ডাক্তার বলছি না।
ডাক্তার নেই
আমি
ওখানে কেউ?
আমি সুপারিনটেন্ডেন্ট কথা বলছি। হ্যালো,
হ্যাঁ ঠিক আছে।
হ্যাঁ আমি অ্যাসিস্ট্যান্ট সুপারিনটেন্ডেন্ট কথা বলছি। আপনার মেয়েকে আমরা এমার্জেন্সিতে নিয়ে এসেছি, আপনারা আসুন, এসে যোগাযোগ করুন।
ও কি হয়েছিল কি? ও তো ডিউটিতে ছিল।
আপনারা জলদি চলে আসুন, যতটা তাড়াতাড়ি পারবেন।
হ্যালো।
হ্যাঁ অ্যাসিস্ট্যান্ট সুপার বলছি।
হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ শুনুন, আপনাকে তখন বারবার বলছিলাম, ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে যে আপনার মেয়ে উনি সুসাইড করেছেন হয়তো, বা কিছু মারা গেছেন। পুলিশ রয়েছে, আমরা হসপিটালে সবার সামনেই রয়েছি, ফোন করছি, আপনারা যতটা তাড়াতাড়ি পারবেন চলে আসুন।
আমরা আসছি আসছি এক্ষুনি আসছি।
হ্যাঁ একটু তাড়াতাড়ি চলে আসুন।
আমার মেয়ে চান।
Not only this, News9 has also accessed the police calls made to the victim's family. Let's listen in.
হ্যাঁ হ্যালো,
হ্যাঁ বলুন।
আমি আজিকর বলছিলাম।
হ্যাঁ
আচ্ছা
বলুন।
আপনারা আসছেন তো?
হ্যাঁ একদম আসছি। কেমন
আসুন।
আছে শরীর?
আপনারা আসুন, আসলে কথা হবে। আসুন, আজিকর হসপিটালে আসুন, আমাদের এই চেস্ট ডিপার্টমেন্টের এইচওডি স্যারের কাছে আসুন।
হ্যাঁ
হ্যাঁ বলুন।
আপনাদের বাবা মা বাবা বলছিলাম।
আচ্ছা আসুন, আপনারা আসুন,
হ্যাঁ, চলে
আপনারা
আসছি,
আসুন।
চলে আসছি,
কত
চলে
দূরে
আসছি।
এসেছেন? আস্তে আস্তে আসুন, কত দূরে এসেছেন?
এই তো বিডি রোডে উঠলাম এখনই।
আচ্ছা আসুন, এসে সোজা আমাদের অফিসে ওপরে আসবেন। ওপরে ডিপার্টমেন্টের চেস ডিপার্টমেন্টের ওপরে হেড এইচওডি ঘরে আসবেন, ঠিক আছে?
কোন ঘরে?
হেড অফ দ্য ডিপার্টমেন্টের ঘরে, চেস্টের।
চিনি না তো। ঠিক আছে, আছি, যাবো।
আসুন।
The audio clips also highlight discrepancies between the timeline of the actual incident and the police report that was filed by the Kolkata police before the Supreme Court. The police report mentioned that the hospital administration made only one call to the victim's parents at 10:52 and 10:53, informing the parents of their daughter's death. The report made no mention of two other calls that were made by the hospital superintendent, and neither did the report mention suicide. The police report also didn't mention any call that the police made to the victim's parents. Now, Abhaya's parents also commented on the revelations made by the audio calls.
সিবিআই একই কথা বলে যাচ্ছে, আমাদের যা ক্ষমতা আছে আমরা সর্বশক্তি দিয়ে চেষ্টা করছি।
ঘটনার পর মুখ্যমন্ত্রী বাড়িতে এসেছিলেন, ওনার যেটা বক্তব্য আপনাদের সব দাবি দাবা তিনি মেনেছিলেন।
আমাদের কোনো দাবি ছিল না, আমাদের দাবি একটাই যে আমরা বিচার যেন পাই।
হ্যাঁ,
কিন্তু পুলিশের যে কর্মকাণ্ড দেখছিলাম সেটা আমরা সন্তুষ্ট হতে পারিনি, তার জন্যই আমরা হাইকোর্টের কাছে ভালো এগিয়ে দিয়েছিলাম। হাইকোর্ট সিবিআইকে ভালো মনে করেছে তাই দিয়েছে। আমাদের একটা জায়গায় আস্থা আমাদের রাখতেই হবে।
মুখ্যমন্ত্রী বলেছেন বিচার চায় না, ওরা কেসটা জলে ফেলে দিল। যদিও ওরা মানে কাকে বলেছেন সেটা
আমাদেরই বলেছেন।
আমাদেরই বলেছেন। উনি হয়তো সিবিআই কে পছন্দ করেন না, তার জন্য বলেছেন, সেটা ওনার ব্যাপার, এটা ওনার বক্তব্য, আমি কিছু বলবো না।
I'm joined by a noted historian, writer Hindol Sen Gupta. I'm also joined by input editor of News 9 Live, Brijesh Pandey. But I'll straight away go to Hindol Sen Gupta. Subsequently, I'll pay the bites we have of the political plays in Bengal. But Hindol, what does it tell us? Completely shoddy investigation, cover up, or complete lack of empathy on part of the Chief Minister of West Bengal? What's the big picture? Because the outrage expressed by the students had a basis, and this is the basis. This is the basis. This must have been the talk in the first 48 hours.
You know, Kartikeya, you'll remember that when you mentioned me talking about this issue a few days ago, I actually, to begin with, my first instinct was to say no, because I don't want to get in. I never get into, political parties and their local activity and all of that. But I'm a Bengali. I can't deny that. And I had actually never heard these phone recordings before. I can't remember a moment when I felt worse than I'm feeling at the moment. What would be going on in the minds of these parents who are being called by these absolute scumbags who are calling them up and lying about their daughter's death? This is unbelievable. This is a shame. It's a blot on the name of all the culture that we talk about as Bengalis. I have never felt more ashamed. I grew up in a Gunda-laden CPM Bengal. I know that Bengali society has been rotten with politics, Gundaism and jihadism for the last 40 years.
So, as you can see, the more that comes out about this case just horrifies and disgusts people more and more. And you can see that this isn't exclusive to the medical community, people all over India, rightly so, are just sticking behind the parents and with so much sympathy because they have been lied to. The police lied when they gave out the report about the incident, about reporting it to the parents, about holding the parents off from seeing her body for 3 hours. Like, it just gets worse and worse. And I'm recording this now in February 2025, but if I'm being honest, I'm sure more and more will come out. But I'm also sure that I don't think the Indian justice system is going to change anything except for saying it was all one man's doing. Abhaya's parents are above anything, simply devastated and completely lost with grief from the loss of their only daughter. Her parents look back on their sweetest moments with her and clearly remember her selfless care towards her father and his medication, for example. With the parents noting that She would always put the care of them before herself. She would always make sure her dad had taken his medication before she'd go out, before she'd go to work, anything. They really miss her selflessness. Her parents weren't the only ones deeply affected by what happened to her. In fact, Abhaya's death triggered widespread protests from just August the 10th, the day after her death, over the lack of safe spaces for women to rest while on shift, the lack of accountability for women's safety by the hospital, and the high level corruption and lack of transparency over this case. Some of these protests lasting more than 45 days. Protesters were angry that the government has seemingly made no changes since the 2012 Delhi bus case, even after passing legislation promising change, but of course to no avail. Still now, instead of promising to try and help improve women's safety in the workplace, they have just decided to put limits, or at least talk about putting limits on how many hours women can do in one shift, which has further angered protesters and Abhaya's parents themselves, as the government is again backpedaling, and instead of looking out for women's safety, they are just going backwards in terms of equality. This will obviously hinder women's ability to earn instead of putting pressure on the real root cause of the problem in India, which is respect for women. I once read a comment by an Indian woman on social media that said, "Welcome to India, where cows are more respected than women." And I think that just sums up this case perfectly, unfortunately. Thank you. If you're still here, you made it to the end of the video. I am going to be here each week giving international true crime videos or tragic tales. And I'm going to aim to cover as many different countries across the globe as possible. I know that in true crime, we see a lot of videos that are highly concentrated in maybe 2 or 3 countries. I am going on an aim to cover as many countries as possible. It, of course, gets a bit harder in terms of which countries release public records and having to do translations, but I really like this challenge I'm setting for myself, and I hope to see you next week. Bye.